Hi, I'm Bianca and I'm going to show you how to make meat bolognese. So ingredients wise, I'm doing double quantities of the recipe because I want to put some in the freezer for another date. We start with a sofrito mix which includes onions, celery and carrots. Meat wise, you can either have just beef or beef and pork, which is more traditional. I've just got beef. I've got a couple of bay leaves there for flavour, some tomato puree, tins of tomatoes. We like ours really tomatoey, so I'm actually doubling up the tomatoes that's on the recipe, and some red wine or white wine depending on what you've got. If you fancy it, you don't need to have it, but it does add another dimensional flavour. So to start with, I'm just going to peel the onions, peel the carrots, and I have washed the celery. Now these carrots are really small, so instead of just using 2 large carrots, I've got lots of little ones that I'm going to use. So with the onion, I'm going to show you how to chop it really nicely and finely. When I took the hairy bits off the ends, I left the main heart intact, which is really important. Cut it in half, and then with a small knife, you thinly slice it, but just don't go all the way to the very end. This holds the onion together. When you cut it, so it's all still intact, then with your sharp knife, cut it through and you get a really nice small dice. So I've left the little heart, which you can either chop up into small pieces or just throw away. Onions were quite large and there is quite a lot of onion, but it will cook down and they'll be nice. If you've got some bits of onion that are too big, then you just hold your point of your knife down with your other hand and you can just kind of cut it into smaller pieces. So along with the onions being really finely diced, we also want the other vegetables in the sofrito to be finely diced. So if you cut it into slices and then into strips, and then you can chop it into nice small cubes. So I'm trying to make sure that the celery and the carrot and the onion are all the same sort of size. So depending on how big your celery sticks are, slice them and then chop them. So I've put a large pan onto a medium-high heat. I've got a large saute pan, but a large saucepan is fine. I'm going to add some olive oil. You can use any oil, to stop the vegetables from sticking. And when that's heated up, I'm going to add the veg. So just fry around your sofrito, stirring it to make sure it doesn't catch on the bottom. And after a couple of minutes, once the onions start to look see-through, you can add the meat. So as you can see, the onion is see-through now. It's lost its opaque look. So I'm going to make a little hole in the middle and add the meat. And you want to let the meat brown on the bottom so you get that lovely flavour of caramelisation. Breaking up the meat a bit with my spoon while it browns on the bottom. And once that's gone a nice golden colour on the bottom, I'll turn it around. Not yet. While that's cooking, I'm just going to add some salt and pepper. Do want quite a bit of salt. This is sea salt, so it's not quite as strong as table salt. And I'll add some pepper. Now at this point, you could add some herbs if you've got them, basil, dried basil, or some sage is quite nice, it's up to you, but I'm going to just leave it with the bay leaves. So I'm just breaking down the pieces of meat into smaller pieces, mixing it up with the sofrito. Now that the meat is all ground up and we've got some lovely crispy bits, I'm going to go in with my wine. If you aren't using wine, then you just move on to the tomatoes. We're going to add the wine first, let that cook down a little bit. So cooking the wine actually cooks off the alcohol and you just get left with the wine flavour. Wine cooked down for a couple of minutes. We're going to go in and add the bay leaves and the tomatoes. So there goes the water, and that's just going to cook down, so we don't need to worry about it being too watery. Just give it a stir. And I'm also going to add our 2 tablespoons of tomato puree. Stir, wait for it to come up to a boil, and then I'm going to put it on a low heat, and you can just leave it for hours and hours. My mum always makes hers in the morning and leaves it to cook all day. So now it's been brought up to a boil, I'm going to just put it onto a simmer, and I'm going to put a lid on and prop it open so some moisture escapes with a spoon, like that. So every now and then, if you just give your bolognese a little stir just to make sure it's not sticking to the pan or drying out. If it's looking a bit dry, just add a little bit more water. And ideally you want to cook it down for as long as you possibly have got. So I'm just going to check the seasoning of this to make sure that it's salty and peppery enough. That's actually fine, I've added enough. So the bolognese has been cooking all afternoon for about 4 or 5 hours, and it's definitely done now, but you could keep cooking it if you needed to. You could put it in the fridge or freezer if you don't want to eat it today, and it's delicious served with pasta, or you could turn it into a lasagna.